out by some guy at no, I mean, the trouble is, economically, it's easy as, I don't know if you've heard my line about this, I've got some headlines out of it, that if we discovered that there was a looming threat of invasion from outer space, and that in order to prepare for it, we have to do suddenly a lot of investment in roads and education and high-speed rail, then we'd have full employment in a year. And then if somebody said, oh, you know, we were wrong, there aren't actually any aliens coming, we'd still have achieved full employment. So the obstacles to us having a full recovery are political, but politically they're huge. It's a combination of partisan gridlock, but also just intellectual gridlock. You know, a lot of people just don't want to believe that this is a demand problem, and that there are times when you want the government to spend more.
Actually, I read your book,
Yeah.
and it seems to me that you want to have a policy like FDR.
Well, or like, but the thing is, even FDR didn't manage to do it. When FDR was, you know, had even though he had congressional majorities that Obama can only dream of, and also the filibuster wasn't a normal thing and all that, even so, his policies were never sufficient to get us to full employment until the threat of war came along. And then there was intellectual confusion. So there's great stuff. You can look at articles in the American Economic Review, actually, from 1939, learned articles carefully explaining that there are huge structural problems with the U.S. economy, and that it's foolish to imagine that just an increase in demand could bring us back to full employment. The world has changed. And then the war started in Europe, and the United States started its military buildup, and within the next 2 years, employment rose 20%, the equivalent of 27 million jobs today. So the sad thing is that we're seeing all the same arguments in the year 2012 that people were making in 1939. So, but it's not an economic problem. It is a political. It's a problem in our politics and a problem in our heads, not a problem in the economy.
So it's a political gridlock here.
Well, political gridlock, but also intellectual stuff. There's a lot of people, both parties, who just cannot bring themselves to believe that it's as simple as there isn't enough spending in this economy. I mean, Bill Clinton keeps on talking up the structural unemployment, and our workers just don't have the right skills. And he's not trying to undermine the president. People tell him that, and it's not plausible to him.
But the supply side philosophy doesn't work this time.
Not now. You know, give us back to full employment, get somewhere close to it, and then we can start talking about it with you. I mean, we don't have the right skills. That's a problem. But right now, I mean, actually, so I'm starting to start some of tomorrow's column. You know, right now, people with the right skills can't find jobs. And the unemployment and underemployment rate among recent college graduates is startlingly high, and that's because there just isn't enough demand out there. So if we had a stronger economy, then we'd start to have real shortages of some skills, but we're not there now.
So how do you apply this to the Iranian economy?
It's a fatist idea. Iran looks like a totally different universe. Iran is actually flirting with high inflation. I don't know quite but I have done no homework at all.
It's a lot of demand, but we have a lot of graduates that can't find jobs.
Well,
so
there's
how do you
also
apply this?
That could be a different kind of issue.
That's what I'm saying.
That could be. I mean, if you really have, there's a fairly big thing in significant parts of the world of actually too many people with higher education, the wrong kind of higher education. That's not a problem here, but it has happened. That's been a fairly characteristic developing country problem. Not in, or people. The student loan. I was in Korea a couple of weeks ago. Less than that. I've been traveling too much. And they have a problem. They're doing very, very well in terms of having highly educated populace, but it's mostly private universities and it's heavily debt financed. And they're starting to look like they have a student loan problem, student debt problem that may dwarf ours. So everybody manages to have problems of different ways of getting in trouble. I was actually shocked to find out that South Korea has household debt levels that are comparable to ours, or maybe even higher. That you don't think of that as being something that takes place in Asian countries.
Well,
But a lot of it is borrowing for education.
it's a capitalist economy.
Germany has high debt, high private debt. Italy has low household debt. You think of it as mostly being an industry. That's something that mostly seems to happen in Anglo-Saxon. And
Reinhardt and broke off research, basically, where they looked at recovery from economic depression, particularly financial crises, in terms of where it was starting from the peak. And there's also been some research and some debate that it should be used and analyzed from the trough instead, particularly from John Taylor.
yeah.
So I was curious what role you thought that second type of research was for.
Well, the trouble with measuring, so business cycles, you know, they're actually a couple. First, the general principle, which is that peaks are a lot more similar than troughs are. Right? The tops of business cycle recoveries are a lot more like each other than the bottoms of recession. Because recessions vary hugely in depth, whereas the living out or you can just read Tolstoy. All happy families are alike, each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. It's the opening of Panic Granite, which is sort of true of economies. And so the particular thing there is, suppose that you have a major financial crisis, but you respond fairly effectively to the emergency. So you have a stimulus program that blunts the impact of the recession, but then fades out. You rescue the banks, so you avoid having a really terrible slump, but still you have a severe recession. Then you're going to compare that with not doing any of those things, with having a catastrophic Great Depression level collapse. Well, you're going to have a much faster recovery out of the first year of growth out of a Great Depression level collapse. It's going to be a lot faster because you're so far down that there's no place to go but up. Whereas if you manage to blunt the impact of the initial crisis, your first year of recovery is likely to be a lot slower. You really don't want to say that second case, where you actually managed to avoid the worst, is worse performance than the first case. And yet that's what Taylor's doing. He's actually got it literally as a chart that shows first year of growth from the trough for a series of recessions. And says, well, this one is bad because we aren't bouncing back as fast as we did from 1933 to 1934. And that's sort of like not a very good comparison. So that's the other problem that Taylor has in this stuff is he talks as if things that were not financial crisis recessions were. 74, 5, and 81, 82 were not financial crisis recessions. Those were Fed recessions where the Fed slammed on the brakes to fight inflation, and then as soon as it took its foot off the brakes, the economy bounced back. And so you really want to look, for the United States, you need to go back to the 30s, or you need to go back to the panic of 1893 to find something that looks like what we're going through right now. So that's I'm annoyed with Taylor, obviously, because here this is one of the things that we really have learned. It's something we learned which is that business cycles that start with a financial crisis are different, and he's basically trying to throw up a dust cloud around it for political reasons. Because if you admit that, then you don't blame Obama quite as much.
A quick one. So I've heard it said, you should never waste a good recession, right? And you're saying we should target demand. How would you rate how President Obama did that?
He operated. So there's two things. One is that he operated under huge constraints. I mean, we don't have a parliamentary system where the majority party just gets to push stuff through, and the filibuster, which used to be very rare, has become standard now. So essentially, we've become a supermajority political system.
Why the Republicans?
Yeah, well, but it's I mean, we might see what would happen if roles were reversed now, but that's not going to happen regardless. That we're not going to have we're almost certainly going to have a Democratic Senate. But we're not. It's less certain about the White House actually than the Senate, which is surprising. But anyway, so it became a supermajority political system where it's very hard to do stuff unless you have 60 votes in the Senate. And Obama had 60 votes in the Senate only for that window between the final seating of Al Franken and Pierce Scott Brown in Massachusetts. So it's a very narrow stretch in time when he actually was able to do that, which meant that he had limited room for maneuver. That said, coming in right away, he was too cautious. If they were really desperate for a bigger stimulus, they could have tried. Might have been possible to use parliamentary tactics, reconciliation to get it. They could have done more on housing. They could have at least asked for a bigger plan so that they could say, hey, as those Republicans in Congress were preventing us from having an adequate sized plan, and it was too conservative in judgment. But it was enough to help. So we did blunt. There was not nearly. It's easy to forget now, particularly for young people who, for whom it seems much longer ago than I think it does for me, to forget just how panicked we all were in the winter of 2008-2009. So we blunted that. Housing, this is a case where Obama really sort of failed to do even what he could have done given the constraints. I mean, they set aside $50 billion for mortgage debt relief, and they've used hardly any of it, so they really didn't do very much there. So it's not a great record. I guess you just want to say compared to whom, right? Compared to what what his opponents would have been proposing here. He did bail out the auto industry, which was a hugely successful policy. Compared to policies in Britain or in much of Europe, we have a better track record. I wish it would be great to be enthusiastic about the policy response. They clearly welcome it, but I think we really do need to grade these things on a curve. And it's step back, way back, and it's a terrible thing, because this was, we have an economic crisis of a kind that we basically understand, and we textbook macroeconomics. Got a copy of us right there. This book right here actually tells you what to do, and we didn't do it. And all of us, I'll have a slide when I do the bigger talk about it. But we basically did exactly. In the first year of the crisis, policy around the world was pretty good, but thereafter, completely lost the narrative, and so here we are, still with a deeply depressed Western economy, the whole Western world, 5 years after the crisis.
Where do you see us going with Greek?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's. I wasn't even going to talk about that. So you probably come up with questions. All right. So Europe is they made a. So I have a first solution. Actually, I seem to have turned to science fiction a lot for ideal solutions. So the first solution is to borrow Doctor Who's time machine. Go back in 1992, burst into the hall at Maastricht. They're about to agree on the euro and say, stop, don't do it. Because that was a mistake. They created a single currency without a single government, and that's a really awkward, and under the best of circumstances, it's a really
Collective leadership.
What?
Collective leadership.
Well, no, it's mostly, actually, the big thing is automatic. We have a lot of automatic safety net for regions that get in trouble. So, I've actually done this rough calculation of Florida versus Spain, which are kind of similar in broad outlines. Both huge housing booms and bubbles, collapse, lots of mortgage defaults, all of that, and also big collapse in tax collections in both places. Difference is, in Florida, most of the tax collections that fell were federal tax collections, and Social Security and Medicare keeps coming. And a lot of the banks in Florida are backstopped by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and a lot of the mortgage losses fall on Fannie and Freddie. So if you put all that together, it turns out that Florida, at the worst of it in 2010, was receiving aid, not loans, but aid from Washington, of about 6% of GDP, which is a lot. And if you imagine asking the Germans to provide aid to Spain, a gift to Spain of 6% of GDP. Any German leader who proposed that would be exiled immediately. So it would be. So our system, having a single government, is a really big. It makes it much easier to run a single currency. So they didn't do that.
Well, the U.S. currency is a world currency. That
doesn't matter a bit. Really doesn't matter a bit. There's really no difference in in our situation or Japan's situation or Britain's situation. It's just having that your whole currency area has a single government that matters for this. The problem, but then you have this, so instead in Europe you have this problem where you had this initial rush of optimism after the euro was created, huge amounts of capital flowing into southern Europe, among other things leading to a lot of inflation, which made southern Europe uncompetitive. You know, Spain was a manufacturing powerhouse in the year 2000. It turned into a construction firm instead, because there were Spanish wages rose, because there was all this housing boom. Spanish manufacturing became uncompetitive. They moved into a large trade deficit, and then the construction boom collapsed, leaving them high and dry. Which then turns into a sovereign debt crisis, because you have these depressed economies with depressed revenue, and you have banks that are in trouble, and none of it is backstopped by people outside. So this turns into the crisis we have. So the question is, what do you do? And the current strategy is governments should just cut sharply to try and deal with the budget problems, which depresses the economy further, and wages should fall to make the countries competitive again. And it's beyond, nobody can do it. Nobody can do it on that scale. But, what?
That depresses the demand that you
Yeah, of
talk
course.
about.
Yeah, so it all gets, and so you have this extreme, incredible, ugly situation in Greece, and a not somewhat less ugly, but still terrible situation in Spain. And so the alternatives are, one is to just leave the euro, which is, however, extremely disruptive. And it's extremely disruptive economically, and it's a huge defeat politically, because so much has been placed on this. I mean, Europe, the European idea, the European project is all now intimately bound up with saving the euro. And Greece is particularly scary, because in Greece they have a government of national unity. So the entire political center, reaching quite a ways, is sort of committed to trying to make this policy work. And if it fails, then you have fairly far left, quite far left would be the next in line. And if they don't succeed, next off is a flat-out fascist party, Golden Dawn. I don't know if you've ever seen the Golden Dawn, their logo is these two things like this, side by side, do a little twist, and guess what it turns into. So this is, this is real ghost of the 30s. And and I don't know what happens in Greece, because that seems really far gone. Spain, but the euro could survive the exit of Greece. Spain not. So the trick would be, there's two things that could save it. First, you have to limit the borrowing costs of those countries. And the way to do that is to have the European Central Bank step in and buy their bonds. And that is probably, it's sort of happening, although it's still, there's a lot of roadblocks, but Mario Draghi is pushing, has gotten agreement on principle to do that. The second is you have to have a really strong and probably somewhat inflationary European economy in the core. Germany, it's a lot easier to get wages, Spanish wages in line by getting German wages up instead of Spanish wages down. And that they haven't done any improvement for at all yet. So a few months ago I was dead convinced I was very pessimistic a few months ago. I'm more optimistic now, mostly because I think Mario Draghi actually gets it. Mario Draghi is Ben Bernanke's equivalent. He's the president of the European Central Bank. And I think he gets it. I think he actually understands all of this. And he also turns out to be a very, very skillful political operator. Because a year ago, they were on the verge of a complete meltdown. And they really needed to have purchases of sovereign debt. And there was absolutely no way they could get approval to do that. And so he announced a policy saying, we will absolutely not buy sovereign debt. However, we will lend unlimited amounts to the banks with sovereign debt as collateral. Which, backdoor, and that was brilliant, and that bought them some time. But it's still very touchy. I mean, I still say the odds are that Greece ends up dropping out of the euro, and that the political fallout is really ugly. The odds are a little better than even, let's say, that they managed to keep Spain in which case they saved the euro. But it's, wow, what a mess, and it's entirely self-inflicted. I mean, that's an amazing thing. There's nothing fundamental about European policies, European society that requires that this happen. It's just this terrible mistake of the single currency, which I have to say, I was a Euro skeptic. I didn't think it was a good idea, but This turned out worse than even the skeptics imagined. By the way, the other secret here is that everybody went to grad school together. Mario Draghi and Ben Bernanke and Larry Summers and me. We all were overlapping at MIT in the mid-1970s. So there is this kind of there's actually a bit of a shared intellectual framework, although it's not shared by the politicians.
But you diverge from
Not as much as you might think. I think in the end, when you come down to, now that Larry Summers is out of office, he sounds a whole lot like me.
There's no political pressure there.
Yeah.
Well, you wrote a piece a couple of years ago for the New York Review of Books that was very critical of the way we train economists. And, I mean, I know there was some negative feedback there from people like Casey Mulligan, and I'm sure there was defensiveness all around the country. I'm just wondering, do you think there's been any improvement in graduate education? Do you have any advice for those of us who run PhD programs?
Wow. No, it wasn't the Times Magazine.
Didn't I say that?
You did say it, but it wasn't. It was actually the New York Times Magazine.
Oh,
It's,
sorry.
the Times is a jealous mistress, and they get very upset. But yeah. My sense of it is that a lot of stuff just hasn't changed. I mean, there's a huge amount of inertia in teaching and research programs. If you expect people to change the way they do stuff just because the world hasn't turned out at all the way they said it would, that's probably just that's being hopelessly optimistic. I mean, I was at last year. I was at the European Finance Association meetings. A good friend of mine was organizing it, and so she asked if I would come, and people were still talking efficient markets, with basically brushing aside any notion that maybe there was some problem of financial market instability. Why would you say that? So if the finance people can't say that they need to rethink their position, why would we expect macro to do that? But look, I mean, I have a much better sense of the research agenda than of what's actually going on in the courses. And my sense is that the research agenda has moved. That we're getting a lot of young economists doing not so much becoming Keynesian theorists as doing a lot more empirical work that is not. We had this thing where empirical work was so bound by the models that you were basically estimating a model that you were estimating an equilibrium model without allowing the data to tell you that maybe that model didn't work. And now there's a lot much more straightforward empirical work. There's a lot more reaching out for data from episodes of data of kinds that would not have otherwise been used. So you get stuff like explosion, actually economic history, quantitative economic history. It's had a real renaissance. People going back to the 30s, people looking at wartime episodes, cross-country studies now, and also things like I really love this work by Nakamura and Steinson that uses regional developments in the United States, where you actually get large fiscal swings associated with defense spending. The big increases or reductions in defense spending at the regional level because the size of the defense industry is very different across parts of the United States. And again, so you get or this work by Eigengreen or Work and their associates looking at the 30s. Again, actually using military buildups as a more or less exogenous source of fiscal changes. And that's the way I think it goes. I think what happens is that we get increasing realism through people doing empirical work. That starts to filter into the courses, and but in terms of the actual will people change their minds? I was actually reading this great book from last year about quantum mechanics and the origins of quantum theory, and I think it was Max Planck who said that science progresses funeral by funeral. So I think that's probably true here in economics as well as every place else. Yeah.
Going back to talk about the mortgage model and to 2008, maybe a little bit earlier, there was a speech by Krugman in 2008 talking about Basel Accord and the amendment to Basel Accord on that time, the new Basel Accord, which allows the big banks to expand more in these two areas, mortgages and credit cards, and using their
It was
internal
about
bills.
last Siegel.
Well, Glass-Steagall would have been 99. Though that didn't have much to do with that.
I mean, is this amendment, he was asking.
I'm not sure what that was. I mean, there were a series of changes. In terms of bank deregulation, actually, arguably, the really big stuff was earlier. The really big stuff was the Monetary Control Act of 1980 and the Garnes-Saint-Germain in 1982, which both substantially deregulated what banks could do. But even more important, I always thought that the really big story on banks is not the deregulation, but the failure to extend regulation. And we used to have a system where banks were, we knew what a bank was. A bank was a...
Actually, that would be my question. Do you support going to restrict or regulate banks more, or deregulate banks?
Oh, no, clearly more. The question is, what are, the hard part is regulating shadow banks. The hard part is, right, so we had a system that was built around the notion that a bank was a big marble building with a row of tellers. But the truth is, anybody who borrows short and lends long, anyone who raises funds that seem liquid to the people who put their money with you, but use it to invest in stuff that's not liquid, that's a bank. For economic purposes, that's a bank with all the risks associated. And that can be Lehman Brothers raising money in the repo market. It can be auction rate securities issued by the Metropolitan Museum. You know, all of those things are essentially banking, but were pretty much unregulated. And then, or money market funds. I mean, money market funds are banks for all practical purposes, but were never subjected to the kinds of, never had an FDIC to back them up, never had the kinds of reserve requirements and capital requirements that banks did. And that's where the crisis came, was in shadow banking. So what do you do about that? And the thing is, we actually have Dodd-Frank, the financial reform passed in 2010, does regulate shadow banking, but it does so in a way that's a little iffy. It's because it doesn't actually define what a shadow bank is or set special rules. It gives the Financial Stability Oversight Council, which is basically the Treasury Secretary, Chairman of the Fed, and a few other people, gives them the right to impose additional restrictions on systemically important institutions. And it doesn't define what those are. So it's a pornography standard, actually. You know it when you see it. But that's not a hopeless thing to do, assuming you have reasonably intelligent people doing it. And I think that's a step in the right direction. The other thing to say, by the way, is that you don't have conventional banking can produce really lousy results, really can produce crises, even without exotic instruments and without sort of dramatic changes in regulation. Europe is the case in point. The European story, you know, if you look at in aggregate, Europe looks a lot like we did. Housing bubble collapse, lots of financial disruption. They didn't do the fancy stuff. They didn't have the securitization and the financial instruments nobody understood. They just had kind of straightforward irresponsibility. They just had German Landesbank lending money to Spanish cajas, which then made bond mortgage loans. And that was enough to produce effectively the same results as our more elaborate systems. I'm not sure that it matters. Basically, you need to have a situation where people understand that finance can't be trusted to regulate itself, and that's what nobody understood. And that's what Greenspan, above all, said. You know, not to worry. Modern finance has solved all these problems.
Well, the stock market is doing very well.
Yeah. Yeah. And the question is, yeah, it's actually amazing how disconnected it is from the real economy.
So maybe just one more question, since Dr. Krugman's got a day of answering questions ahead of him, and there's some people that want to have some books signed. Maybe take one more question, and we can serve some cake, and if we have time at the end, we can get back into it.
One more question?
Yes, actually, my question is about what's going on in the Middle East now. What do you see? How do you see the effect of the Arab Spring on the world economy, and in particular in the energy sector?
The answer, short, is I have the faintest idea. I mean, they're just things that I don't know. I have no expertise at all in politics in the region. So far, hasn't seemed to be very disruptive in world energy markets. People thought it might be, and for a while there was some Libya effect, but you've not even seen that now. So. And for the rest, God knows. There are two areas of the world that are important, but I really hate when people ask what do you think, because I don't understand them. One of them is MENA, Middle East, North Africa, and the other one is China. So, okay.
If you can, what policies will you issue to boom the economy?
Wait, here?
And
Oh,
our
here?
current conditions.
Oh, first and foremost, a big slug of aid to state and local governments, so they can rehire the school teachers and restart the stop infrastructure projects. And additional wave of aid to the unemployed, because that'll put money in the economy. And then probably a bunch of smaller scale infrastructure projects. And above all, given the second rail tunnel under the Hudson River, which is really, really important to me anyway.
Well, it's time to cut the cake.
Yeah.